break. I hope you had a good time. This is chapter 6. We're going to talk about all-arounders. We have one more chapter of addictions, and then we move to how to prevent them, and then finally pharmaceuticals. We'll talk about some of the pharmaceuticals out there. So here we go. Maybe. There we go. Okay. Psychedelics alter a user's perceptions whereby reason becomes unimportant, and intensified sensations create illusions, delusions, and hallucinations. Psychedelic fungi and plants have been used by humans since Neanderthal times. Amanita mushrooms have been used in India for 4,000 years. Belladonna has been used since ancient Greece. Marijuana was snorted in ancient China, and LSD in the form of rye fungus ergot was consumed in Renaissance Europe. Psychedelics are readily used today in several forms and have waxed and waned in their popularity over the years. MDMA, about 2.3% of high school seniors used it in 2000. By 2003, MDMA was down to 1.3%. LSD, 4% of high school seniors used it in 1995. By 2006, only 0.6% used it. Marijuana, 37.4% of high school seniors used it in 1979. By 1992, it was down to 11.9%. And by 1999, it had risen to 23.9%. By 2006, the percentage had gone down to 18.3%. So as you can see, it's quite a roller coaster as far as the hallucinogens are concerned. Marijuana is used the most among whites. It's used the least among blacks. Hispanic use it somewhere between these other two groups. Psychedelics come in 5 chemical configurations: indoles, phenylalkylamines, anticholinergics, cannabinoids, and then those that are a class unto themselves. Of the indoles, that includes LSD and the Psilocybin mushrooms, phenylcalamines, peyote and MDMA, anticholinergics, belladonna and datura. The cannabinoids, of course, are marijuana, and those that have a class unto themselves include ketamine, PCP, Salvia divinorum, and Dextromethoraphan, which is a substance used in cough syrup. The effects of psychedelics is determined by toxicity of the substance, the amount that is used, the user's experience with the drug, the emotional makeup of the user, the mood and the mental state at the time of the use, the pre-existing mental illnesses of the individual, and the surroundings in which the drug is taken. Most hallucinogens stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, which includes a rise in pulse and blood pressure, sweating, of course, palpitations, and nausea. Psychedelics interfere with select neurotransmitters. Such neurotransmitters as dopamine, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, anandamide, glutamate, alpha-cytosine, but especially they interfere with serotonin. Psychedelics greatly affect mood because serotonin is amply represented in the limbic system. Stimulation in the reticular formation in the brainstem tends to overload the sensory pathways, making the user acutely aware of all sensations. Overstimulation of the visual and auditory centers may cause auditory stimulation to jump to the visual pathway so that music might be seen and sights such as colors may be heard. This crossover of sensations is referred to as synesthesia. The interesting thing about synesthesia is that it's a naturally occurring situation. It doesn't only happen with psychedelics. It also happens in people who are overly sensitive. Sometimes they will claim that they can see music and that they can smell colors and whatnot. And this is a crossover of sensations. An illusion is a mistaken perception of an external stimuli. LSD and most psychedelics cause illusions. A delusion is a mistaken idea or belief that cannot be swayed by reason or other contradictory evidence. LSD and most psychedelics cause delusions as well. A hallucination is a sensory experience that does not come from external stimuli, but is perceived as coming from an external stimuli. So and that happens with mescaline, psilocybin, and PCP, which cause hallucinations. LSD, psilocybin mushrooms, ibogaine, morning glory seeds, dimethyltryptamine, foxy, AMT, and ayahuasca are the indole psychedelics. These substances create mental interactions by inhabiting the serotonin receptor sites, especially the 5-HT2A sites. These affect your sleep, your mood, anxiety level, and they can form hallucinations and illusions. LSD, or lysergic acid diethylamide, is also known as sacrament, acid, blotter, barrels, orange sunshine, illusion, and window panes. LSD is a semi-synthetic chemical compound found in ergot fungus, found in some cereal grains, but especially in rye. This substance was first isolated from the ergot fungus in 1938, and at that point it was synthesized. LSD-FAIL is a psychological enhancement substance in psychotherapy and as a treatment for alcoholism, even though some people found that it worked for them. One example would be Cary Grant, was on LSD therapy for depression, and it actually brought him out of his depression. So, but it didn't work frequently enough for them to use it on other individuals. We see the same thing happening with psilocin and psilocybin, the magic mushrooms. Today, some people it works for, and some people it doesn't. But there aren't enough people that it works for that we have changed our way of dealing with depression. Normally, they use it with people that have tried other medications and they didn't work. So this is kind of a last-ditch effort. In the old days, we used LSD, and now, of course, if nothing else works, then the psilocin and the psilocybin are treatments that we have been using lately. LSD was purchased by the CIA and experimented with for its use as a truth drug or a mind control drug in a program referred to as MK Ultra. MK Ultra failed. One of the CIA's researchers was Harvard professor Timothy Leary. Leary discovered its psychedelic properties by accident and then experimented on purpose. It was Leary who gave LSD to the rest of the world. It's a fairly simple chemical formula, and therefore it is not that difficult to recreate in the laboratory. LSD was made illegal in 1966. They did a lot of strange experiments. They did experiments on individuals, but they also did experiments with groups. Groups that they didn't tell them that they were going to experiment on them. They tried to spray it on people in a Philadelphia underground subway, in an underground subway station, but it really didn't work. LSD is easily manufactured, though it has mostly come from the San Francisco Bay Area of Northern California. It takes a very small amount of LSD to produce a reaction. The entire U.S. uses less than 11 pounds of LSD a year. The chemical is usually dissolved in alcohol and placed on blotter paper for consumption. 10 to 50 micrograms are the usual dosage on the blotter paper. The popularity of LSD has waxed and waned. It was popular in the 1960s and 1970s as a hippie drug to get in touch with yourself. The drug became less popular in the 1980s, but it made a comeback as a rave drug or supplement to ecstasy in the 1990s. A drug raid in Kansas virtually took the drug off the street and made it too expensive for ravers to afford. Its popularity today is with the same rave crowd for people who want to experience a high. LSD is used in such small amounts that it is not normally detected by standard drug testing. LSD is remarkably potent, creating a reaction with 25 1/millionths of a gram. It causes spaciness, decreased perception of time, mild euphoria. It effects appear 15 to 60 minutes after ingestion. The effects peak at 2 to 4 hours. The effects last for about 6 to 8 hours. User returns to their normal state after 10 to 12 hours. Withdrawal from LSD is more a mental state than a physical dependence. They may experience a downer after that because of the way it works. LSD excites the serotonin. So once once that excitation is taken care of, then of course the serotonin receptor sites have all been occupied by the LSD, and of course now you have a deficit of serotonin, so that's where the downer aspect comes in. Fatal doses of substances, marijuana, LSD, and psilocybin. We have really never seen anybody overdose on any of those. As you can see, nitrous oxide, kava kava. Some of the most dangerous drugs, of course, nutmeg, heroin, datura, isobutyl nitrite, GHB, dextromethoraphan, alcohol, cocaine, MDMA. But at the other side, there just aren't any fatal doses. You'd have to take 1,000 doses of LSD to potentially kill yourself. Marijuana, we've known that people have had accidents while they were on marijuana, but you can't really overdose on marijuana, LSD, or psilocybin. That's magic mushrooms. LSD effects include rise in blood pressure and heart rate, a rise in body temperature, dizziness, dilated pupils, sweating, after-image light trails known as trailing phenomena, sensory distortions, seeing sounds, feeling smells, hearing colors, dreaminess, depersonalization, altered mood, impaired concentration, and motivation. I grew up, or not grew up. I was in college during the beginning of the LSD era, and of course, what they were telling people was that if you're going to take LSD, what you need to do is have somebody with you so that they can keep you from having a bad trip. You need to stay positive. If somebody is there making you happy, then you will have a good trip. If somebody brings you down, man, then you'll have a bad trip and you'll start seeing monsters and whatnot. So that was the way things went back in the 60s and 70s. I've never really been. I've only been in the emergency room when some of these people have come in, so it's not like I was part of that scene, man. Anyway, yeah. LSD activates the locus coeruleus, which causes the release of extra amounts of norepinephrine. The extra norepinephrine enhances alertness, causing the illusion of heightened awareness and introspection. LSD trippers often lose their ability to express themselves verbally. The greatest danger is the impaired reasoning that the individual displays and the loss of judgment. And this is one of the reasons why they tell you, or in the old days, this is what they told you when they first started using it, that you needed somebody to be with you while you were dropping acid. And if you didn't have somebody, then potentially you'd do something stupid and maybe potentially hurt yourself. The user can suffer acute anxiety reactions to LSD, known as bad trips, and this is another reason why you need somebody with you. This is especially common for new users who aren't aware of the intensity of the euphoria or the possibility of panic that can be induced by the drug. It makes you feel depersonalized. You may have acute anxiety. Paranoia is not uncommon. Fear or loss of control, delusions of persecution, feelings of grandeur. Suicide by mistake is not uncommon. People jumping off of the roofs of buildings and whatnot, or stepping out into traffic. These are not uncommon either. So these are suicide by mistake in essence because they're not in the right mind and they really don't know what's going on. The reason that we would get people in the emergency room who are having bad trips is usually because of the depersonalization. They feel like they're having a heart attack. They feel acute anxiety. What you want to do is send them to the mental ward, but of course, usually they come down off of this after a couple hours. It's really difficult to tell if somebody's on LSD or whether they're having some kind of a psychotic episode. That's the way it looks in the emergency room anyway. It's difficult. LSD can be dangerous for people with pre-existing mental conditions or mental instability. Using LSD can aggravate the already existing conditions, leading to more severe mental disturbances. As you can see, if they are already have anxiety, then it may cause worse anxiety, the paranoia, the depersonalization, the fear of loss of control, and all the rest. Use of LSD has also been led to experiencing their mental illness at a younger age. LSD can lead to relapse for an individual recovering from a psychotic episode or major depression. Remember, this causes an amazing. It uses up all those serotonin receptor sites. So once you have your trip stops, all of a sudden you have this downer, and of course that can flip you into another major depression. Individuals without mental illnesses might be thrown into temporary but prolonged psychotic reactions or severe depression that requires treatment. Some individuals have been known to experience prolonged trips that can be emotionally crippling and last for years. Hallucinogen persistent perception disorder, or HPPD, is re-experiencing mental flashbacks of sensations from a previous trip. It is usually from a bad trip. HPPD can occur months or even years after the last use of LSD. The flashbacks recreate the original experience and can be triggered by stress, use of another psychoactive substance, or exercise. HPPD seems to have a strong hereditary component and results in anxiety and panic attacks. And of course, it can, since stress causes the problem, if you have a history of anxiety or panic attacks, then LSD would not be the drug of choice because just thinking that you might have a flashback might cause you to have a flashback because of the anxiety and the panic. Some people suffer from long-term intermittent or continuous HPPD where their flashbacks occur on a chronic basis. This type of HPPD may resolve itself in 5 years or persist indefinitely, resulting in difficulty reading, memory problems, color confusion, halos around objects, visual after images known as trails, intensified colors, macropsia and micropsia, objects appearing abnormally large or abnormally small, illusions of movement, geometric pseudo-hallucinations, flashes of color, imagined images, and floaters in your eyes. HPPD can be caused by other psychedelics besides LSD, though it is most common with LSD. It can also be caused by MDMA, MDA, mescaline, DMT, PCP, marijuana, or psilocybin. Flashbacks occur in from 23 to 64% of regular LSD users. Zoloft, Clonidine, and naltrexone have been used to help to treat HPPD successfully. LSD does not produce compulsive drug-seeking behavior, thus it is not considered addictive. Tolerance develops rapidly, and some users have reported as many as 500 trips in their lifetime. The dependence is probably psychological instead of physical. There are 75 different varieties of mushrooms that contain the active ingredients psilocybin and psilocin. They grow in Mexico, the United States, South America, Southeast Asia, and Europe, and have been used since before recorded history. They were especially important in the Aztec and Toltec religions in Mexico and Central America. These substances are still being used among Mazatec, Chol, Lacandan, Mayan shamans. The chemical structure of psilocybin is very similar to LSD. However, mushrooms are vary widely in strength, with some having as much as 10 times the level of psilocybin as weak ones. Fresh mushrooms are more potent than dried ones. Psilocybin is broken down into psilocin in the stomach. Psilocybin is twice as potent as psilocin and crosses the brain-blood barrier more readily. Psychic effects begin at dosages of 30 to 60 milligrams. The effects last for 3 to 6 hours, and the effects are nausea and other physical responses before the psychedelic effects begin, altered states of consciousness, changes in sight, hearing, taste, and touch, visceral effects, less dissociation and panic than with LSD. Many of the psychedelic effects are caused by the disruption of neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, which oversensitizes the senses. Some people try to harvest their own magic mushrooms, but the similarity between mushrooms that contain psilocybin and those that are poisonous make picking them too dangerous. Ibogaine comes from the African shrub Tabernanthe iboga. At low doses, the substance acts as a stimulant. At higher doses, the substance produces a long-acting psychedelic-like catatonic reaction that can last up to 2 days. Ibogaine is used by the Bwiti tribe of Gabon to remain motionless while hunting. These hunters also claim to have ancestral visions while under the drug's spell. This drug has been considered as a treatment for heroin, alcohol, and cocaine addiction as it reduces withdrawal symptoms. However, neurotoxicity has been observed with its use in this capacity. Morning glory seeds, lolakui, contain lysergic acid amide, which can be used to make lysergic acid diethylamide. Lysergic acid amide has 1/10 the potency of LSD. It requires several hundred morning glory seeds to get an effect that is usually this usually causes a great deal of nausea. To exacerbate this effect, the seeds that are sold commercially are dipped in a toxin that induces vomiting. The effects of morning glory seeds include sensory disturbances and mood changes, nausea and vomiting, drowsiness, headache, and chills. Dimethyltryptamine Dmt was first synthesized in 1931 and is found in several South American trees, vines, shrubs, and mushrooms. The psychedelic substance in DMT is similar in structure to psilocin and is usually smoked, snorted, or injected, as it is deactivated by stomach acids and causes visual hallucinations, loss of awareness of the individual's surroundings. The high lasts only for 10 to 60 minutes. A similar response comes from the venom of the Sonoran desert toad. DMT. 5-methoxy-N or N-diisopropyltryptamine 5-MeDiPT, also known as Foxy, and alpha-methyltryptamine AMT are two psychedelic tryptamines. These drugs aren't very popular, but have been found at raves in Arizona, California, Florida, and New York. The effects of the tryptamines are similar to other rave drugs: euphoria, empathy, visual and auditory disturbances, formication or itching, paranoia, emotional distress, nausea and vomiting, and diarrhea. The effects from small doses will last 3 to 6 hours, and heavier doses may last up to 12 to 24 hours. Ayahuasca or yage is a psychedelic drink made from the bark, leaves, and vines of the Banisteriopsis species of the Amazon jungle. This drink causes intense vomiting and diarrhea before it deposits the drinker in a dreamlike state for 10 hours. Select tribes of natives in Peru, Brazil, and Ecuador use the drug for divination, prophecy, sorcery, and medicinal purposes. Cults have sprung up in Brazil around the use of this substance. The active ingredient is an indole alkaloid harmaline. This group of psychedelics are related, the phenylalkylamines are related to adrenaline and amphetamines, though their effects tend to last longer. The best known phenylalkylamine psychedelic is peyote or mescaline. Mescaline is the active ingredient in the peyote cactus and the San Pedro cactus. The use of these cacti for religious insight and rituals dates back 4,000 to 5,000 years among the native tribes of Mexico, Central and South America. In North America, 50 tribal groups were still using the drug for religious purposes into the 20th century. In 1996, the Supreme Court ruled that peyote usage by the Native American Church of North America was protected by the Constitution. Mescaline is found in small gray-green crowns of the peyote cactus. They can be used dried or fresh. The buttons can either be eaten or boiled in a tea. The mescaline is bitter and nauseating and may take as many as 7 to 8 buttons to elicit a response. The effects last up to 12 hours and results in colorful visions and hallucinations. MDMA and Mdma, ecstasy, the rave drugs, were first synthesized in 1910. These drugs have a similar chemical structure to mescaline. These drugs produce the effects, feelings of well-being, euphoria, psychedelic stimulatory effects. MDA was popular as the love drug in the 1960s and 1970s as it was supposed to increase your libido. It was later found to destroy serotonin-producing neurons in the brain, along with a few overdose deaths made it less popular. MDMA or ecstasy was developed to produce the same effects as MDA, but with fewer side effects. MDMA lasts for 4 to 6 hours compared to the 10 to 12 hours for MDA. It is popular as a rave drug, as it is reputed to make the individual dance and interact with the other people at the party. The drug was tested for its psychological impact by the U.S. Army in the 1950s, but instead was touted as a drug that would help therapists tap into emotions and memories of repressed patients. It was used in this capacity in the late 70s and early 80s. The drug is found to create empathy in the user. Street vendors changed the emotion empathy to ecstasy to improve sales. People taking MDMA experience intensified senses of smell, which makes the use of strong-smelling substances like Vicks inhalers and Tiger Balm popular at raves. Glow sticks are waved in front of ecstasy users to create a mesmerizing effect. MDMA tablets cost pirate manufacturers from 50 cents to $2 to make, but sell for as much as $10 to $70 depending on the market. DEA reports that between 30 and 50% of MDMA sold isn't MDMA at all. The effects of MDMA are similar to amphetamines that begin to appear about 30 minutes after ingestion. Increased heart rate and respiration, excess energy, fainting, sweating, chills, hyperactivity, tightening of muscles, especially jaw muscles, and clenching of the teeth. Baby pacifiers and lollipops are often used to prevent tooth damage. Infrequent use leads to heightened responses. Heavier use leads to rapid tolerance. Overuse of MDMA may result in dehydration, that may result in water toxicity and electrolyte imbalance, pupil dilation, blurred vision, and eyelid twitching, headaches, agitation, nausea, and anorexia. Serotonergic axon apoptosis results in thought and memory impairment, rapid and potentially dangerous heart rhythm problems, seizure activity, stroke, cardiovascular failure, and coma, malignant hyperthermia that can result in muscle damage, renal failure, and even blood coagulation. 20 to 60 minutes after ingesting MDMA and lasting for 3 to 4 more hours, the drug changes the feelings of the user, feelings of happiness, clarity, peace, pleasure, altered sensory perceptions without depersonalization or detachment from the environment, non-sexual empathy for others, self-awareness, heightened self-esteem, open-mindedness, acceptance, intimacy. MDMA's psychic effects are probably produced by its overstimulation of serotonergic producing neurons in the brain. MDMA forces the discharge of the reservoir of serotonin into the synaptic clefts. If more MDMA is taken when the effects begin to wear off, the response is a reduced reaction. Serotonin receptors may retreat into their cell membranes to avoid damage. This is known as downregulation. It may take up to a week to regenerate enough serotonin to produce the same effect. After use, MDMA users may experience extreme depression and suicidal thoughts. Because of the downregulation of serotonin receptors, tolerance to the drug is fairly rapid. Because of the questionable content of tablets said to be MDMA, polydrug use is common. LSD is taken with MDMA to increase the time the MDMA effects last. This is known as candy flipping, flip-flopping, XNLs, or candy snaps. MDMA with hydrocodone, OxyContin, codeine, heroin can enhance the euphoric feelings of both drugs. GHB with MDMA, a form of modern-day speedballing. Nitrous oxide in MDMA intensifies the inhalant rush. Prozac and MDMA are used together to buffer the serotonergic cells from toxicity. MDMA and Viagra are taken together to enhance sexuality and is referred to as sextasy. And of course, that would only work with males. MDMA has been maintained because of its popularity with people who attend raves, dance parties, and the electronic dance clubs. Rave and club music is also known as techno and maintains a trance-like beat that may be accompanied by light shows and laser light effects. These events are usually accompanied with the use of many illegal drugs that includes MDMA, nitrous oxide, GHB or GBL, Dextromethoraphan, ketamine, PCP, Nexus, and any street drugs other than alcohol. Problems at raves usually come from other drug use, alcohol, methamphetamines, LSD, GHB, and ketamine. MDMA effects that can cause problems are usually in the form of overheating, falling injuries, passing out, bad psychedelic experiences, and mental destabilization. Two drugs that are popular as rave drugs in the Netherlands are 2CT7 and 2CT2, also known as Blue Mystic, Tryptase, Seventh Heaven, 7 Up, Lucky 7, and Beautiful. The drugs are psychostimulants and cause the following effects: induced delirium, heightened sensitivity, increased awareness, nausea and vomiting, dangerous cardiovascular responses. Nexus is a trade name for 2CB or 4-bromo-2,5-dimethoxyphenylethylamine. It creates mild stimulation at low doses and intense psychedelic experiences at high doses. This is an amphetamine-like chemical. Nexus. STP is a street name for 2,5-dimethoxy-4-methylamphetamine and is also known as DOM, serenity, tranquility, and peace. It is similar to MDA as it produces a 12-hour intoxication that results in intense stimulation, mild psychedelic reactions. It is notorious for producing bad trips. PMA or 4MA is the street name for paramethoxyamphetamine. Its stimulant effects only last an hour and leaves the user with a sudden rise in blood pressure, distinct after images, pins and needles tingly feeling like a chill or a person's hair standing on end, seizures, hyperthermia, coagulation of blood, and muscle damage. Bromo dragonfly is also known as bee fly or fly. It is a powerful hallucinogen that has a longer duration than any other hallucinogen, sometimes lasting for days. It produces hallucinations, delusions, and memory loss. Belladonna, now we're talking about the anticholinergic psychedelics. Belladonna is a small plant found throughout the world that has been used for eons by women wanting to make their eyes more striking. It dilates your pupils. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman. Belladonna blocks acetylcholine receptors in the central nervous system to produce delirium, inability to focus your eyes, tachycardia, which is rapid heartbeat, intense thirst, hyperthermia to the point of death, hallucinations, separation from reality, sleep for up to 48 hours. Jimson Weed is a psychedelic plant found throughout the United States, where its seeds are eaten, brewed into a tea, or the leaves are made into cigarettes, and is also known as thornapple, angel's trumpet, Jamestown weed, madapple, moonflower, and stinkweed. The substance produces the following effects: jerky movements, tachycardia, hypotension, hallucinations of snakes, spiders, and lizards. And that's what Datura looks like. I've got it. It's this stuff grows everywhere. I've got it in my yard. There you go. Ketamine is an anesthetic used with both humans and animals, and is a close chemical relative of PCP, though ketamine is shorter lived than PCP. Ketamine was the most widely used anesthetic during the Vietnam War. It was liked because it does not affect the patient's breathing, but has the additional side effects of dissociation, feeling like you are outside yourself. The liquid is crystallized and the crystals are smoked in a pipe or snorted to the effects of mild dreamlike intoxication, sensation of mind-body separation, dizziness, free-floating giddiness, slurred speech, impaired muscular coordination. And there you go. Those are that's surgery during the Vietnam War. You can tell by the color of the uniform. Everything, all the medical uniforms look like this. They were this color. I don't think I still have any. Anyway, yeah. Of course, you don't do that. You don't have that color green anymore. Nobody does that anymore. But that's everything was that color back in the day. Heavy doses of ketamine produce the psychedelic experience known as being in a K-hole, where the individual feels as if they are having an out-of-body, near-death experience of depersonalization, hallucination, delirium, bizarre or mystic experiences. They can feel no pain, respiratory depression, increased heart rate and blood pressure, combative or belligerent behavior, convulsions, and rarely coma. Phenocyclidine hydrochloride, or PCP, was developed in the 1950s as a general anesthetic for humans. Unfortunately, the drug had toxic and hallucinogenic side effects, and it was relegated to use with animals only. It is also known as angel dust, peeps, KJ, Sherman's, or ozone. It is sometimes sprinkled on marijuana and smoked in a joint. It can be smoked, snorted, swallowed, or injected. PCP seems to disconnect sensory messages sent to the central nervous system, dissolving your inhibitions, deadening pain, a strange feeling of mind-body separation, forgetfulness, difficulty concentrating, aggressive and violent behavior, depersonalization. 40% report hallucinations, tactile, visual, or auditory. Damage can be done by the individual to themselves by overstressing muscles, sinews, and flesh. And some of the cases, especially back in the 80s and 90s, there were cases where policemen would come up to somebody they were trying to arrest, and they would have to beat them. They would have to fight them, and sometimes they would beat them to death because they were afraid they were on PCP. People on PCP can't feel any pain. You can break their arm and they'll come at you, swinging their limp arm at you. I mean, that's how bad this stuff is. So sometimes they would beat somebody to death because they were afraid they were on PCP, and they wouldn't stop. And the only way you could stop them was to kill them. Low doses of PCP produce mild depression and then stimulation and last for 1 to 2 hours. Moderate doses of PCP produce an intense sensory deprived state and last for 4 to 6 hours. Heavy doses of PCP produce catatonia, coma, convulsions, and kidney failure, and can last for up to 48 hours. The general drug using population does not routinely use PCP because of the high frequency of bad trips. Anterograde and retrograde amnesia is common with the use of PCP. Salvia divinorum is a member of the mint family and produces psychedelic effects when ingested. It creates dreamlike hallucinations, occasional delirium, and out-of-body sensations. When smoked, the effects last for only 7 to 10 minutes. The key ingredient is salvorin. At present, the drug is legal but under review for scheduling. And this is what it looks like. Actually, I've got this stuff in my backyard. Anyway, purple flowers are very pretty. And it smells like mint. Amanita mushrooms have been used for rituals as far back as Neanderthal man. The mushroom causes dreamy intoxication, hallucinations, delirious excitement, physical toxic effects that can be deadly. The effects start 30 minutes after ingestion and last for 4 to 8 hours. Active ingredients resemble the inhibitory neurotransmitter GABA. Too much of the mushroom will make the user sick, as if they have food poisoning. And that's what they look like. You may have picture. We used to have a picture of this red top mushroom in our bathroom for some reason. It's quite attractive, I guess. So you'll see this mushroom from time to time. Amanita mushrooms have been, I already said that, didn't I? Dextromethoraphan is the active ingredient in many cough syrups, including Robitussin DM, Coricidin, and Romalar. 10 to 15 times the recommended dose can give the user euphoria, mind-body separation, auditory and visual hallucinations, loss of coordination, dilate pupils, decrease orgasm, nausea and upset stomach, itching rashes, fever, tachycardia, acute anxiety, and panic reactions. There you go, Robitussin DM, Delsum, NyQuil. These all have dextromethoraphan in them. So what people would do, they would go to clubs and they would chug-a-lug a bottle of Robitussin DM or Romalar. They chug-a-lug the whole bottle. You know, this is how much you're supposed to take. You can see it's 20 mils. Yeah, about 20 mils. And this has 355 mils. So if you drink half the bottle, you're floating pretty high. And that's what they would do. And it usually did a number on them. Nutmeg and mace come from the nutmeg tree. In heavy doses, they can cause mild floating sensations to full-blown delirium. Such heavy doses do have their price. It gives you a bad hangover and severely upset stomach. This combination is rarely used outside of prisons where other psychedelics are unavailable. And that's what a nutmeg looks like. And they powder it. That's so you would take a big spoonful of nutmeg. Mace is a protective layer around the nutmeg nut, and this is the nutmeg nut. And so this is the layer, the mace layer. Marijuana, cannabis, or hemp plants are used to make powerfully strong fibers for rope, edible seeds, oil that can be used as a fuel or lubricant, and medicinal substances. It is illegal in most countries around the world. Cannabis is a plant that was developed in China and spread throughout the world for its medicinal properties and powerful fibers, but especially its powerful fibers. The medicinal properties people kind of ignored. Cannabis appears in writings from ancient China and India. In India, it appears in the Vedas as a divine nectar. Cannabis is a form of hemp, in the form of hemp, was brought to the United States before the Revolutionary War to grow for ships for the Royal Navy. George Washington worked to expand his holdings to grow more and more hemp for profit. Hemp wasn't used for its psychoactive effects until after World War I, when migrant workers from Mexico introduced smoking the wacky weed to other poor immigrant minority groups. The psychoactive properties of marijuana became popular during Prohibition, when the still legal pot was smoked for its psychoactive effects by those who sought a new high. In 1937, marijuana was declared illegal. Hemp was legally grown during World War II, and the government even experimented with cannabis extracts to produce a truth drug. Hemp is legally grown in France, Italy, the Yugoslavian countries, England, and Canada to make paper, textiles, and rope. Marijuana is legally used in the Netherlands in coffee shops. 160 million people worldwide use some form of marijuana. Going into the 1960s, only 2% of the people in the United States had tried an illegal drug. However, the counterculture movement in the United States that grew out of the civil rights and anti-war movements of the Vietnam era increased drug experimentation exponentially. By 1979, 68 million Americans had tried marijuana, and 23 million used it on a monthly basis. Attempted control of the substance waxed and waned over the years, but a resurgence of marijuana prohibition in the 1990s led to a marked drop in its usage. By 1992, just over 7 million people reported using marijuana on a monthly basis. By 2005, the number of monthly users had doubled. In 2005, 3,700,000 people used marijuana on a daily basis. Every year, 80,000 emergency room visits occur because of marijuana usage. 44% of male adult arrestees test positive for marijuana. 32% of female adult arrestees test positive for marijuana. 57% of juvenile male arrestees test positive for marijuana. 32% of juvenile female arrestees test positive for marijuana. The plant grown to make fiber is low in psychoactive substances and is referred to as hemp. The plants grown to produce psychoactive resins are referred to as marijuana and are lower in fibrous structure. And this is hemp on the left, and this is marijuana on the right. There we go. Marijuana on the left and hemp on the right. As you can see, hemp is a much taller plant. Street names for marijuana include pot, muggles, 420, Mary Jane, Griffa, Bud, Herb, Chronic, Dank, African Black, Panama Red, Acapulco Gold. Actually, these are types of marijuana. African Black, Panama Red, Acapulco Gold, Maui Wowie, Humboldt Green, BC Bud, that's British Columbia Bud, Buddha Thai. These are all types of or brands of marijuana. But other names that are street names: grass, leaf, ganja, charas, scents, weed, of course, dope, dubage, and dekind. But like I said, Maui Wowie, Humboldt Green. These all have to do with where they're grown and the color of the weed: African black, Panama red, Acapulco gold, Maui Wowie, Humboldt green, British Columbia bud, and Buddha Thai are all brands of the stuff. Marijuana comes in 3 distinct species, but hundreds of hybrids. Cannabis sativa is the most common species. It's grown in tropical, subtropical, and temperate regions. It grows 5 to 20 feet tall. The plant grows from 1 to 5 pounds of buds and smokable leaves every year. Cannabis indica grows in Southeast Asia. It's shorter and bushier plant and is generally stronger smelling. It's usually grown to produce hashish. That's Cannabis indica. Cannabis ruderalis is a thin, small plant. It has very little THC, and therefore you wouldn't grow it at all. Most marijuana is grown using the Synesthesia growing system, where male and female plants are separated before pollination can occur. By removing the plants before pollination can take place, the plants produce no seeds and the THC is stronger. This method is used with both the Cannabis sativa and the indica plants. Dried marijuana leaves, buds, and flowers are crushed and rolled into cigarettes known as joints. Marijuana can be smoked in pipes. In India, marijuana is divided into 3 different strengths depending on the part of the plant smoked. Bhang has the lowest potency and uses the stems and leaves. Ganja is stronger and is from the stronger leaves and flowering tops. Charas is the concentrated resin and is the most potent. And that's what bhang looks like. It's from the lower leaves on the plant. That's what ganja looks like. It's from the tops. And there is resin that looks like rat manure. Anyway, that's the rat manure. That's the resin. Depending on the region of the country, only 10 to 50% of marijuana consumed in the United States is homegrown. Most of the marijuana being smoked is smuggled in from Mexico and is either grown in Mexico or Colombia. In the United States, inventive growers have gone to more and more creative ways of producing their product, from growing fields of the plant in the wilderness, back areas of national forests, to growing plants in grow houses using grow lights and hydroponics. Of course, now that it is legal in 20 states, it can be grown legally in the United States, but you need a license to do that. And I guess the licenses are not that cheap. They're fairly expensive. The typical marijuana plant contains over 420 chemicals. 30 of them have been found to be psychoactive. The most potent chemical is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. When ingested, the psychoactive chemicals in the marijuana are converted by the liver into 60 other metabolites, some of which are psychoactive as well. Only about 20% of the THC in the joint is retained by the body, but the longer the smoke is held in the lungs, the more THC that is absorbed and the stronger the high. Modern marijuana contains as much as 4 to 25% THC as compared to the 60s average of 1 to 3%. Most of the research from the past is based on the weaker marijuana. And this is something that you need to think about. The marijuana that people are smoking now is much, much stronger than it ever has been in the past. Much to researchers' surprise, marijuana has its own receptors in the brain, or at least that's what researchers thought when they discovered new receptors in the brain when doing marijuana research in the 1990s. Hence the name endogenous cannabinoid neurotransmitters, or CBs. The first endogenous neurotransmitter that was found to occupy the cannabinoid receptors was anandamide. CB1 receptors are found mostly in the brain: the hippocampus, the amygdala, the basal ganglia, including the nucleus accumbens, and the cerebellum. CB2 receptors are found mostly in the immune system and the lower body. CB1 receptors are in areas that integrate sensory experiences with emotions. They control your learning, they control your memory, They control a sense of novelty. They control motor coordination. Opioids and cocaine overdoses are dangerous because they suppress the heart rate and respiratory functions of the brainstem. At the same time, it is almost impossible to overdose with marijuana because the anandamide receptors that it utilizes merely increase or decrease our minds to sensory inputs. Marijuana is a vasodilator and so causes bloodshot eyes when it is used. This often leads to conjunctivitis. It also causes physical relaxation or sedation, some pain control, coughing from lung irritation, an increase in appetite, small to moderate loss of muscle coordination, increased heart rate, decreased blood pressure, decreased eye pressure, decreased nausea, decreased ability to track movement, and afterimage of a moving object. Got several stories. This was while I was in the military. Of course, marijuana was fairly popular. I was called out one day. This was like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I jumped in the car, and we lived on base at the time, and we lived in the back of base housing. And so we got in the car, and the speed limit in base housing is 10 miles per hour. So I'm driving down the road at 10 miles an hour, and I've got about a mile to go, or yet a mile to get there, because I live so far out. And so right in front of me, I'm a lab tech, and so right in front of me, the X-ray tech pulls it in front of me, and he's going 5 miles an hour. I don't know how his car ever went that slow without dying, but he was going like 5 miles an hour. And I'm thinking, come on, let's go. You were called out just like I was. Let's get to the hospital so we get this stuff done. I got my kids in the car. I'm trying to get to the base. Finally, we pull up. We pull up to the gate, and they wave us both through. I'm able to get around him at some point. I just kind of pulled around him. And I got to the hospital, and I drew the blood and started running the test. And I ran down to the X-ray, and I said, "What in the world's wrong with you?" And I looked in his eyes, and they were so bloodshot. You wouldn't believe how bloodshot they were. But he thought he was going, too fast. He thought he was speeding, but he was stoned. And I don't know if they saw it. If they did see it in the emergency room, they didn't say anything about it. Anyway, they bawled us both out for taking so long to get there. And I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to get him in trouble. But it's kind of a strange situation. Kind of an odd situation. When I was in Montana, we played in an all-night tournament, all-night softball tournament. And we had played these guys earlier in the day, and we were both coming up through the losers bracket. And we played them during the day, and they were pretty good. Their women, it was a co-ed tournament, and their women were really good. And the guys were pretty good too. So here we pulled them again at like 2 o'clock in the morning, because we were in the losers bracket. So here we had to play them again, and of course, they had beaten us fairly soundly earlier in the day. And so here we are, we're playing them again. But those guys, they had been smoking pot, and I'll tell you what, we almost killed them because they couldn't catch. They could barely throw. I mean, they usually walked people because the pitcher was throwing the ball halfway to the plate. I mean, it was really a mess. And they called the game after 3 innings because somebody had gotten hit in the head and they couldn't catch anything. They were sticking their glove out as the ball, we're hitting line drives at them, and they just stick their glove out because they couldn't really see it and they couldn't really track it. And half the time it was going through their glove and hitting them and whatnot. So they called the game after a couple innings. But it was a mess. We had bloodied this lady's face. Not on purpose, of course, but we were just playing softball. But she couldn't catch because she couldn't see due to the fact that she was stoned, dude. And they were laughing. They thought it was the funniest thing in the world. Marijuana causes a small temporary disruption of the male hormone testosterone. While this is of little importance to most males, for those with a hormone imbalance or those going through puberty, it can cause some real problems. The testosterone decrease can also cause a lowered sperm count and sperm motility in chronic pot users, making it less likely that they will be able to reproduce. So if they have a low sperm count already, or they have been smoking marijuana for an extended length of time, they are chronic users, they will have abnormal forms. They will have an increase of abnormal forms. And this may be one of the reasons why we have the birth rate in the United States has gone down over the last, I don't know, 10 or 15 years. Actually, we're just about at zero population growth right now. So it may have something to do with marijuana. It's a possibility. It could be a factor. Marijuana makes people hungry, called the munchies, when THC occupies the CB1 receptors in the hypothalamus that indicate satiation. Marijuana doesn't sharpen an individual's sense of taste. Marijuana also gives the individual a feeling of confusion about where they are, and eventually makes them feel deja vu, along with being drowsy, aloof, and having a difficult time concentrating. With the advent of marijuana high in THC, these varieties have more extreme effects. Giddiness, because it's so strong. Giddiness, increased alertness to the point of hypervigilance. You can read paranoia under this hypervigilance. Major distortions of time, major distortions of color, major distortions of sound, sensation of movement under the user's feet, visual illusions, hallucinations, paranoia, depersonalization. Marijuana users tend to act more empathic to others' feelings when under the influence of the drug. Marijuana also makes the user more suggestible. The main organ in the brain that is affected by marijuana is the amygdala, which regulates your appetite, your pain, anxiety, fear, suppression of pain memories, and the sense of novelty. When an individual uses marijuana, the THC artificially stimulates the amygdala, making even the most mundane objects and ideas interesting. If the individual overstimulates the CB1 receptors, these cells will downregulate sometimes, reducing these receptors by 70%. When the individual isn't stoned, this reduction of CB1 receptors will result in the loss of novelty. Even the most novel stimuli will be boring to them. For a marijuana smoker to continue working, studying, or even maintaining a relationship when not stoned takes a great deal of desire. Thus, the individual will be more likely to continue to use to combat the perpetual boredom they experience when they aren't stoned. Receptor recovery can take from 2 weeks for moderate smokers up to 6 weeks or longer for heavy smokers. And if you've ever been around a chronic marijuana smoker, you know that when they're not stoned, they are bored to death. Nothing makes them happy. They have a really hard time being interested in anything. It really all depends on how much they smoke and whether they've been stoned lately. Short-term memory is held in the hippocampus for the immediate use. If this information is needed, it will be held until it can be transferred to the long-term memory. Anandamide receptors in the hippocampus dictate how much memory is available for immediate use. Because THC occupies anandamide receptor sites, it limits the amount of hippocampal short-term memory. The user may lose significant chunks of their lives while using because of the memory impairment caused by the THC. Marijuana slows learning and disrupts short-term memory, but doesn't affect long-term memory, though it does disrupt your memory in general, your attention span, and cognitive functioning. Oddly, users may feel that they are thinking deeper, but in retrospect, they aren't. When the brain is developing, there is an explosion of the connections and synapses among the nerve cells in the frontal lobes around age 12. A great deal of pruning of these connections and synapses will take place through the next 10 to 12 years, depending on the use. Unused connections will be broken and discarded. Heavy marijuana usage during this time frame will change the brain structure. Because of the distorting effects of marijuana, the individual may develop an impaired ability to determine danger, to organize, and to prioritize. Marijuana and MDMA use is especially destructive for memory. Marijuana tends to give their user a distorted sense of time. This is known as temporal disintegration. While this effect may help with dull, repetitive jobs, for more complex jobs like studying, the individual may become easily bored and quit. Temporal disintegration is part of the most debilitating aspects of using marijuana, along with impaired judgment and short-term memory loss. Multiple and interactive tasks can be impossible for these individuals. Distortion of time, impaired judgment, and short-term memory loss will be evident in the individual's behavior for up to 7 days after use. By 28 days, the individual has returned to what passes for normal with them. Research into the effects of smoking marijuana on the respiratory system indicates that smoking 4 or 5 joints is as destructive on the mucous membranes and the lungs as smoking a pack of cigarettes. This is because marijuana isn't regulated as to its growth and refinement and is rarely filtered. Chronic use of marijuana can lead to chronic coughing and bronchitis. The most damage is done to those individuals who smoke both marijuana and cigarettes. Marijuana smokers have increased mucus-secreting epithelial cells, but decreased cilia to expel the excess mucus. For those who smoke both cigarettes and joints, they lose all the cilia in their mucous membranes, meaning that they will have to cough to expel the mucus. While the researchers have found that there is no link between marijuana and lung cancer, they have also discovered that marijuana suppresses the anti-tumor immune response, leading to a greater probability of developing tumors, including breast tumors. Marijuana has also been found to increase replication of HIV, accelerating its progress. Because of its capacity to suppress the immune system, users tend to be more susceptible to colds, flu, and other viral infections. The immunocompromised are not advised to use marijuana. Marijuana routinely increases select mental problems, paranoia, anxiety, and depression. If a person is on the edge, the confusion and depersonalization of THC will very often tip the scales in a negative direction. Individuals who maintain a paranoid mindset while smoking marijuana might have exacerbated reactions with stronger blends or other drug mixtures. Tolerance to marijuana occurs very rapidly. Often new smokers will experience inverse tolerance, or they actually become more sensitive to the marijuana and have heightened sensations with less smoking. Marijuana's effects last for from 4 to 6 hours, but the substance may be detectable for up to 28 days and actually will stay in the body for up to 3 months. Because of the length of time it takes to rid the body of the substance, withdrawal from marijuana doesn't start until a longer period after abstinence. Research has disclosed that despite the rumor to the contrary, marijuana smokers do go through withdrawals, though they are more delayed than any other drugs, and like other drugs, not everyone will go through all the withdrawal symptoms. Everyone will have craving. Other symptoms include anger, irritability, anxiety, and/or aggression, aches, pains, chills, depression, inability to concentrate, slight tremors, sleep disturbances, decreased appetite and stomach pain, and sweating. Unlike most other drugs, marijuana has a stronger psychological addiction than physical addiction. Marijuana has just as strong chronic and compulsive use as any other drug. Unfortunately, marijuana's reputation is that it is non-addicting, leading people into illegal usage and destructive circumstances with the idea that because it is less addictive, the behavior is all right. Adolescents are very sensitive to peer pressure. People who smoke marijuana tend to hang around other people who smoke marijuana because this crowd is a more rebellious nature than, say, the chess club. Drugs tended to be around for the cool people to try. In this way, tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana are gateway drugs to heavier drug use. People who develop a pattern of use at an early age restructure brain cells toward continued addictive use. Tolerance of less serious drugs may lead to a desire to refine that high. Researchers have found that almost everyone in treatment programs have started with the big three. Marijuana use by 17 gives a 2.7 to 5.2 greater chance of heavier use. Marijuana is the most widely used illicit drug in the world and is the drug of choice in many countries, such as Australia, Canada, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Mexico, Panama, and South Africa. In the United States, penalties for possession and use vary from state to state. In 2004, 44.2% of the arrests for drugs were for marijuana. 90% of these arrests were for possession alone. Marijuana arrests almost doubled from 1980 to 2004. Other countries punished for marijuana, Austria, Belgium, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, and Spain don't prosecute for small amounts for personal use. In England, possession of marijuana can lead to a 5-year prison term, though most sentences are minimal. In the Netherlands, marijuana use is limited to the coffee shops. Sales outside this system are illegal. Some countries have the death penalty for possession of hard drugs: Algeria, Indonesia, Iran, Malaysia, Singapore, Turkey, and Thailand. In Japan, possession is illegal and people can go to jail for having less than an ounce of marijuana. Smugglers with larger amounts of marijuana will routinely be imprisoned for 3 to 4 years. Foreigners who are caught are deported after they serve out their sentence. These individuals will often be banned from re-entering Japan for life. Paul McCartney has a lifetime ban from an incident in 1980. In India, an individual can be imprisoned for up to 10 years for smoking marijuana. Venezuela has a minimum 10-year prison sentence as well. People caught for reckless driving or after having an accident are frequently not only tested for alcohol, but other drugs as well. In the case of marijuana, there are some circumstances that make this information erroneous. Marijuana stays in the system for weeks after it stops having a psychedelic effect on the individual. Elimination rates often vary by individual because of fat content. There is little accurate data about how much marijuana in the system causes impairment. There's often another drug in the system at the same time, especially alcohol. While the research is fairly concrete, when dealing with alcohol and impairment for marijuana, it is not so simple. Statistics dealing with marijuana and traffic problems often involve polydrug use. 65% of heavy drinkers also use marijuana. People who drive under the influence of marijuana often are paranoid and drive too slowly for traffic. Research shows impaired driving for marijuana smokers up to 8 hours after smoking, and 60% failed 2.5 hours after smoking a moderate amount. A French study showed marijuana as a factor in 10% of traffic accidents. A U.S. study showed marijuana as a factor in 4 to 14% of injury or fatal accidents. Most drug urine tests place the cutoff for marijuana use at 50 nanograms per milliliter. For long-term smokers of marijuana, this amount of drug could be found in their system as long as 3 weeks after the last use. It would take a total of 6 weeks for a heavy smoker to test completely negative. A first-timer and frequent user should be able to test negative 24 to 48 hours after use. The Olympic Committee sets a cutoff of negative at 15 nanograms per milliliter. Marijuana and its extracts have been used medicinally since the beginning of recorded history, as a muscle relaxant, as an analgesic or painkiller, as an appetite stimulant, to control spasms and convulsions, to calm anxiety, to treat asthma, to treat jaundice, beriberi, and ague, to stimulate childbirth, to relieve coughs, to treat withdrawal from opiates and alcohol, as an antibiotic. Modern medicine uses marijuana or its derivatives to treat glaucoma, nausea, and pain, to subdue uncontrolled movements, as in the case of multiple sclerosis, to stimulate weight gain from wasting illnesses such as cancer and AIDS. Unfortunately, abuses of the system have led to limitations and acceptance of marijuana for medicinal purposes. Marijuana and its derivatives contain THC, have been incorporated into select pharmaceuticals. Dronabinol or Marinol and Sesamet are medications containing THC that can be given to individuals for nausea and pain control. Sativex is a spray that is used as an inhaler by people suffering from MS to aid with movement coordination. These medications are merely maintenance drugs. Some patients have complained that the drugs give them the feeling that they are getting better when they are actually staying the same or getting worse. If the patient has a history of addiction, the medications can lead to a relapse. The National Drug Control Policy Commission researched the use of marijuana as a medication and came up with the following conclusions. Cannabinoids have a natural role in pain modulation, control of movement, and memory. THC has potential therapeutic value for pain relief, control of nausea and vomiting, and as an appetite stimulant. Smoking marijuana is a crude method of delivery of THC and also delivers potentially harmful substances. The psychological effects of cannabinoids include anxiety reduction, sedation, and euphoria, and can be therapeutic. Marijuana smoking is a serious risk factor for the development of respiratory diseases. And that is the end of chapter 6. So I'll see you guys next week. Maybe. I think I will. Anyway, I don't know if we have another chapter next week. So I'll talk to you later.